Welcome to the Workers' Reading Room. Today I'll be reading Chapter 5 of F.I.S.T by Joe Eszterhas, but first a quick recap. In the previous chapter, we are introduced to Vince Doyle, a man of Irish descent from humble beginnings in the flats. Loathing the life his parents lived, a life of hard work and barely scraping by, Vince found work for himself living a life of crime at a young age. After years of moving up the ranks in the Cleveland criminal underworld, he now owns his own club. While admiring his club and the life he now leads, Johnny walks in. Johnny worked for Vince as hired muscle for a time, but ended up quitting because shaking down shop owners left a bad taste in his mouth. Vince assumes that Johnny has come for work, so he offers him a job, but Johnny refuses. All Johnny wants is a bottle of whiskey. Disgusted by this, Vince throws Johnny $100 and they part ways. And just as a side note, I wanted to add that in the movie Vince Doyle, it doesn't sound Irish one little bit, but I really Irished up the accent last time, so I'm just having fun with it, so hope that doesn't bother anybody. And now, F.I.S.T. Chapter 5. The next morning, with Abe at his side, Johnny walked across the gravel of the yard toward the rectangular Fleckner warehouse. I did it, Ma, he thought to himself. I promised you. Here I am. I did what you wanted. I got a job. I crawled. It looks like a fucking casket, he said to Abe. Abe grinned. It's bigger. Come on, we'll go in the back. Last night, home from Vince Doyle's, Johnny had put the $100 bill on the kitchen table. His mother was sitting there writing her weekly letter to the old country. She glanced at the money, didn't say anything, and finished the letter. She stamped the envelope, sealed it firmly, put the letter on the table next to the money, and looked up at him. Where you get, Johnny? Her voice was soft, her eyes accusing. I stuck up a bank, Ma. What do you think? But this bank wasn't doing too good. It only had $100 in it, he smiled. She was unyielding, her tone rock hard. Where you get? What are you looking at me like that for? He turned away from her. What difference does it make? Where you get? His face felt hot. He pressed it to the wall for a moment, then turned back to her. All right, Ma. You want to know? I'll tell you. I'm not going to lie to you. I never lie to you. He said it bitterly, paused, and looked at her. She wasn't giving an inch. Her eyes were nailing him to the wall. I was down by the river, he said, and there was this big black car stuck in a ditch down there. And this guy inside, this gentleman, that nice Mr. Holden, the one you took the money from after Pa died. Remember him, Ma? I remember, Johnny. Her face was a mask. He was in a big hurry to get to some important meeting, some conference, Ma. And 'cause he was so nice to us, giving us all that money, I helped him with his car. You lie, Johnny, she said quietly. Always lie. He ignored it, fought not to let the hurt show on his face. And after we got the car out, he said, he just handed me $100. That's how nice a guy he is, Ma. Why you lie, she said. 'Cause you make me, that's why. His voice was thick with anger and pain. Johnny, Johnny. She shook her head and looked away from him. She picked the envelope up and drummed it against the table. Your big shot friend, she said. The gangster, Doyle. How is he? Oh, Ma, he said, turning away from her. What do you want from me, Ma? On the truck dock outside the warehouse now, a group of men were unloading crates. Abe stopped and waved one of them over. He was breathing heavily. There were purple pouches under his eyes. Hey, Al, Abe said. I want you to meet a friend of mine, Al Dorset, Johnny Kovac. How you doing? Johnny said. He remembered him, the man with the pretty wife who had let Gant humiliate him in front of the gate. New man, huh? Al Dorset grinned. Did you take him over to see Fat Ass yet? Not yet, Abe smiled. What kind of mood's he in today? He's on a real tear. Good luck, you're gonna need it. Dorset looked at Johnny. I've seen you someplace. I was down at the gate, Johnny said, the day you was hired. Oh yeah, Dorset said. He looked at him a long moment, then looked away, his eyes hooded. Well, he said, I better get going. I'll see you around. They walked into the warehouse, a cavernous, dimly lighted hall filled with fruit and vegetable crates. At its center was a raised platform 4 feet off the ground with steps leading to it. Behind a lectern on the platform stood the foreman, Gant, checking invoices. "Mr. Gant?" Abe said. Gant ignored them. Abe looked at Johnny and winked. "Excuse me, Mr. Gant." Gant kept his eyes on his invoices. "Why the hell aren't you out there unloading the celery?" he said. "Mr. Gant, this is Johnny Kovac." "So?" "He's the one we talked about." Gant looked up from his papers and looked down on them from the platform. "Ain't you got work to do?" he said to Abe. "You want to hold hands with your boyfriend here all day?" "No, sir," Abe said, and walked away. Gant turned back to his papers. Johnny stood in front of the platform. An hour later, he was still standing there. "Kovac," Gant finally said, grinning at him. "What kind of bohunk's that?" "Hungarian." "Hungarian, huh?" Gant's grin widened. "Now let me tell you something, Kovac. I don't like hunkies. I don't like any of you goddamn flatheads. The boat should have sunk that brought you over here. You screw around with me just once, Kovac, you're out. There's 100 other bohunks out there every day begging to take your place. You hear me?" Johnny nodded and didn't say anything. "I've been hearing you all my life," he thought. "I hear you 24 hours a day. I hear you when I see the look in Ma's eyes. I hear you in my dreams." "You get here at 7 o'clock sharp every day," Gant said. "You stay as long as I want you to. If the delivery don't get here till 10 at night, you stay till 10. You get paid 8 hours, period. You get sick, tough shit. You don't like the deal? Get out of here right now." He paused. "One more thing. You drop some of the stuff, you damage the merchandise, it's out of your pay. You hear me?" "I hear you," Johnny said. Gant pushed a button on his platform. A buzzer echoed loudly through the hall. "Pollock!" Gant yelled. "Put this hunky to work." A towering black man walked towards him. His head was completely shaved. Tied across his sweating forehead was a red bandana. "Come on," the black man said, and led him toward the dock outside. "All we need here is another hunky." Johnny stared at him. "What are you gawking at? Ain't you never seen a Polish person before?" Johnny grinned. "You're Polish?" "The name's Lincoln Dombrowski." Johnny laughed. "Lincoln Dombrowski? Jesus." "You Jesus?" Dombrowski said. Johnny laughed. "Kovac. Johnny Kovac." They shook hands, grinning at each other. "For reasons of my own," Dombrowski said. "I like people to call me Link." "How come? Ain't you proud of being Polish?" Dombrowski laughed and looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "We're going to get along just fine." The buzzer startled them. "I said get to work!" Gant yelled. They hurried to the truck dock. "It's do piekla," Dombrowski grumbled. "What the hell does that even mean?" "It's an old Polish saying." "Okay," Johnny said. "It's an old Polish saying. What the hell does it mean?" Dombrowski handed him 2 crates from a tall stack of celery. "It means yes, sir, Mr. Gant. Yes, sir." "It sure didn't sound like that to me." Dombrowski smiled. "We better get these on in there." "How come I got 2 and you're only taking 1? Dombrowski looked at him with a mischievous grin. "'Cause all us Polacks is lazy," he said. "Don't you hunkies know that?" The next day, Johnny went to work at 7 in the morning, and at 10 o'clock at night he was still there, waiting for a delivery. He sat on the dock with the others. Some of the men were smoking, others were asleep. Dorset and Abe were kidding with Dombrowski. Johnny watched them relentlessly. "Lincoln comes from my mama," the black man said. "Dombrowski's my dad. 1 plus, 1 minus." Abe grinned. "Which one's the plus, Link?" "Depends on who it is that's looking at me," Dombrowski said. They laughed. "Christ," Johnny said. "It's 11 o'clock." Dorset looked at the clock. "That's what it is, all right." "Did the same thing with my boys," Dombrowski said. "One of 'em I named Thaddeus. The other, he's Roosevelt. Balances out." They laughed again. Johnny got up. "How can you guys just sit around? We've been here 16 goddamn hours already." "Yeah, but we ain't been paid yet for the 8, Dombrowski said. Abe said, "What are we waiting on anyway?" "Tomatoes," Dorset said. Dombrowski smiled. "Never did like the taste of tomatoes." "Don't you worry, Link," Dorset said. "Gant's not going to offer you none." They laughed. Johnny kept pacing. "We just going to sit here till dawn?" They looked at him. None of them said anything. The buzzer went off. Johnny jumped and turned toward the platform. "You want to go home, Kovac?" Gant yelled. "Go on!" Johnny stared at him, then sat down slowly. The men watched him. "He pushes that fucking thing one more time," Johnny said. "I'm gonna." Dombrowski smiled. "What are you gonna do then, Johnny?" As the days went by, he did nothing. He went to work each day. He collected his paycheck each week. He was too tired at night to do anything but eat and sleep. He felt caged. He thought often of the old man and how he had trudged through the flats to his mill each day, and he thought about what Vince Doyle had said to him. "Johnny, you could have been somebody." 6 months later, in the freezing cold, he was still there, still lugging his crates. He had never held a job this long. He wore the old man's cap to work each day. The buzzer whipsawed through his nerves. "Kovac, get up there. Stack these crates up straight. Straight, I said. You deaf and dumb hunky? Get off your ass, Kovac." Sometimes, when he got home at night, he could hear the buzzer for hours afterward. It went off deep inside him and at the center of his being. He held his ears and blinked his eyes. It stopped, and then minutes later it would go off again. Once it woke him in the middle of the night. The house was cold, but the sheets were wet from his sweat. He sat up in bed, shaking, and waited. The buzzer went off again, and he buried his head in the pillow. "Eat, Johnny," his mother kept saying. It was her solution to everything. He was losing weight. The walk to the warehouse seemed longer each day. The crates he lifted were loaded down with lead. His battered leather jacket didn't seem to protect him from the cold. He couldn't even seem to get warm. A few weeks before Christmas, Gant summoned them to the platform. There was another man up there with him Johnny had never seen before. He wore a woolen overcoat, a fur hat, and spit-shine leather boots. He was jowly, balding, and in his 60s. The men whispered among themselves. It was the owner, Dietrich Fleckner. "Keep it down, you guys," Gant smiled. "Mr. Fleckner's got something to say to you." Gant's tone was different, Johnny noticed, almost kind. "What's going on?" Johnny said to Abe. Abe grinned. "Santa Claus." "You men, you work hard all of the year, all of you men," Dietrich Fleckner said with a thick Bavarian accent. "I know this. You don't gotta tell me this. I want to say Merry Christmas. We give you all $20 bonus." The men cheered. Fleckner called their names off. Abruzzi, the prune-faced little paisan. Sweeney, whose brogue was so thick sometimes Johnny couldn't understand him. Faflick, who chewed tobacco and went around hawking all the time. Knowles, who was always showing his kids pictures around. Baker, who handed out cigarettes last week because his wife had a baby. Dorset, whose name had to be called twice because occasionally he was hard of hearing. Dombrowski, who Amos and Andy'd up to the lectern and got a big laugh. A dozen other names were called, and then Belkin, and then finally Kovac. Johnny climbed the steps to the platform. Fleckner pumped his hand, smiled, and handed him the envelope with the 2 crisp $10 bills in it. "Kovacs," Fleckner said. He pronounced it in the old country way. "Yeah," Johnny said. "That's what it used to be." "Magyar." He said the word with feeling, respect. "Yeah," Johnny smiled. "Jomunkus a Magyar," Fleckner said with his German accent. He turned to Gant and translated it. "Good worker, the Hungarian." "Yes, sir, you bet," Gant said. His eyes were laughing. "Kozanom," Johnny said. "Thank you." "Bulldog Karaksunyet," Fleckner smiled. "Merry Christmas." Johnny went back to his crates, grinning, the $20 securely pocketed. The guy's all right, he thought. He even spoke Hungarian. Maybe the company wasn't the problem. Maybe it was Gant. Fleckner never came around. He probably didn't even know how Gant treated them. On the truck dock, he talked to Abe about it. Abe laughed at him. "What the hell's so funny?" "There ain't no Santa Claus, Johnny. Don't you know that? I got the $20 right in my pocket." "Don't go spending it too fast," Abe said. He gave him a strange smile. Late that afternoon, after Fleckner had left, Gant hit his buzzer and called them up to the lectern one by one. Johnny saw that money was being exchanged. "What does he want?" he asked Abe. "His Christmas presents," Abe laughed. "You'll see. I don't want to ruin it for you. It's a surprise." Johnny heard his name and walked up to the platform. "Let's have it," Gant said. "Huh?" "If you don't hand it over right now, Kovac, you're back out on the street." Hand what over? Gant looked at him. My Christmas present. Your what? Gant snapped his fingers. The $10. It hit Johnny then. His body felt rigid. He couldn't move. I'm not going to tell you again, Kovac. He dug into his pocket, took the envelope out, and handed Gant a 10. Nice of you, Kovac, Gant smiled. Thanks. Walking home that night, Abe said, It's like that every year. Fleckner hands the bonuses out. We hand half of it back to Gant. That way Fleckner gives Gant a nice big bonus every Christmas, he laughed. How come somebody don't tell Fleckner about it? Johnny said. Abe stopped. Listen, don't you ever think it's real convenient we get 2 bills every year? That don't mean Fleckner knows. Hey, Johnny, Abe laughed. No shit, there really ain't no Santa Claus. 3 days before Christmas, Gant buzzed him to his platform again. I got good news for 2 of you guys, he said. We're cutting down. 2 of you guys can get home early for Christmas. He smiled. You know I like all you guys, so who's it gonna be? Why don't you make it easy for me? How about some volunteers? Gant laughed. The men shuffled their feet nervously. Come on, he said. I want to see some hands. Nobody moved. How about you, Dorset? You want to go home to that pretty wife of yours? No, sir, Dorset mumbled. Pollock, how about you? Can't you get a job shining shoes? Dombrowski didn't say anything. I got an idea, Gant said. Kovac, how about you? You ain't got any kids. Do these guys a favor. Get your hand up. Johnny felt the men looking at him. His face flushed. Gant laughed at him. All right, Gant said. You and you, get your vouchers. Johnny looked at them. Knowles and Baker. The 2 men were watching him, their eyes pleading. Johnny looked away. He went back to his crates. Through an ice-crusted window, he could see Knowles and Baker trudging across the snow in the yard to the gate. The bastard was right, Johnny thought. I should have put my hand up. I should have quit. I was scared. He picked up a crate and hurled it furiously into place. You damaged the merchandise, Kovac? Gant yelled. It's out of your pay. Dorset brought a crate over to his stack. He was just ragging you, Johnny, Dorset said. He already had Knowles and Baker picked out, Dombrowski said later. It ain't your fault, Johnny. You need the money like everybody else. But he blamed himself anyway and brooded. It couldn't go on like this. They had to do something. He had to do something. He thought about going down to Fleckner's office downtown. He even looked the address up, the 46th floor of the Terminal Tower building. He would tell Fleckner about the Christmas bonuses, about the 16 hours work for 8 hours pay. He dismissed the thought. What if Abe was right? What if Fleckner was in on it? Even if he wasn't, though, if he went up there to see him, Fleckner would think he was some sort of troublemaker, some sort of Bolshevik. That wouldn't work. But what if some of the men went up there with him? Better yet, what if all the men got together? What if they pulled something at the warehouse to show Fleckner they really meant business? At Christmas dinner with Abe, Johnny could hardly wait to tell him about it. Ma put a steaming pot on the table. Stuffed cabbage and dumplings, she said. Make you strong. Looks great, Ma, Abe smiled. Yeah, we gotta be strong to work, don't we, Ma? Johnny said. They pay the money, she said. We're gonna buy mansions up in the Heights, right, Abe? Abe looked at him. What's ragging you? That goddamn Gant, Johnny said. What the hell you think's ragging me? It's not him, Abe said. It's the company. That damn buzzer of his, I'd like to... It's all the companies, Johnny. They all got buzzers. Listen, Johnny said slowly. I've been thinking. What if we talk to some of the guys? Abe laughed. About what? No, I mean it, Johnny said. What if we... No more stuffed cabbage and dumplings, Abe grinned. That's what. What if we all got together? And did what? I don't know, Johnny said. Stop working, maybe? Abe roared. He stopped eating. Stopped working, he said loudly. You hear that, Ma? It ain't me. He's trying to start a revolution. What if we got old man Fleckner down there, Johnny said, and told him, we don't work till you get rid of Gant. Abe shook his head, still laughing. And the buzzer, right? Sure, the goddamn buzzer, too. Abe looked at him seriously. They'd kick us out of there in 5 minutes, Johnny. That's what. Not if we did it late at night. Not if we was packing something that'd freeze if we'd left it out all night. Abe, don't you see? Abe chewed his food, paused. I'll tell you what I see, Johnny. Guys like Dorset and Link. What's going to happen to them if they lose their jobs? Did you think about that? They're not going to lose their jobs, Johnny said. What if they do? Are you going to risk that? You got a right to risk that? I'm telling you, they're not going to lose their jobs, Johnny said. You don't know that. I do know it. Bullshit, Abe said heatedly. You're just pissed off at Gant. You're just thinking about yourself, Johnny. You gotta think about them. I am thinking about them. No, you're not. The hell with you, Johnny said angrily. I'll talk to the guys myself. We'll see how they feel. Yeah, Abe said. You do that, Johnny. They ate their food in silence. Don't start trouble, Johnny, Ilona Kovac said. Always trouble. Your pa never complained. Johnny pushed the plate away from him. That's right, Ma, he said bitterly. Pa never complained. At the warehouse the next week, as they waited for a delivery at midnight, he tried to talk Dorset and Dombrowski into it. They laughed at him. Too much of that Tokay for Christmas, Dombrowski said. Let's just try it, Johnny insisted. Try it? Dorset grinned. You think we'll get a second chance? Look at the hours we gotta work. It ain't fair. Dombrowski smiled. One thing I learned growing up Polish, the black man said, ain't everything that's fair. Dorset laughed. Ain't nothing that's fair. That son of a bitch, Johnny said angrily. We just gonna let him kick us around? Hell, Johnny, the black man said. I've been kicked around and I've been kicked around. That man, I ain't even worried about him kicking. I ain't either, Dorset laughed. Johnny flared at them. Do you guys got any guts? Guts, Dorset smiled. Listen to him. I know I got 'em, Johnny, Dombrowski said. They's always hungry. Gant's buzzer shattered the silence. Dombrowski said, Yes, sir, boss, yes, sir. I hears you calling me, and ran exaggeratedly toward the truck dock. Take my word for it, kid, Dorset said sadly. You can't beat 'em. You're young. You'll see. And that's the end of Chapter 5 of F.I.S.T. Hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you for listening to the Workers' Reading Room. Have a good one, folks.